I now have the honor to introduce our next speaker, and it's not often that you get to see the fall of a dictator. I remember when it happened in the Soviet Union, and it happens from time to time, and we hope it'll happen in many of the other countries where people are suffering. But we did just see it in Zimbabwe, and after many decades. And so we're honored to have one of their most prominent dissidents, Pastor Evan Mawarire. He's emerged as a leading voice against the government, the former government of Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe. His activism galvanized public anger over Mugabe's 37-year rule and the nation's crumbling economy. Pastor Evan heads a small church in Harare. Came to prominence in 2016 after posting a video on Facebook draped in the flag of Zimbabwe, voicing his frustrations about the economic hardships and hopelessness facing many Zimbabweans. He launched the This Flag campaign, #ThisFlag. If you tweet him out, make sure to hashtag this flag, which drew widespread support online and in the streets. In the country's biggest popular act of defiance in a decade, Harare and other cities were shut down after Pastor Evan urged Zimbabweans to stay home as a protest against Mugabe's government. He faced 20 years in prison on false charges of trying to overthrow the government, but he was recently acquitted after Mugabe was forced to resign just a few months ago. Foreign Policy magazine in 2016 named Pastor Evan one of the top 100 global thinkers of the year. South Africa's Daily Maverick honored him as African Person of 2016. Again, it's important that you're here, Pastor Evan. As I told you, just up the street at the World Health Organization a few months ago, I was shocked to see on Twitter that the head of the World Health Organization decided to name Robert Mugabe as its goodwill ambassador. There was world outrage that we played a part in. And eventually, after 3 days, the United Nations Health Organization had to cancel that appointment. I'm glad that Mugabe resigned and that we finally meet Zimbabwe's true goodwill ambassador. And with that, I give you the floor.
Thank you very, very much. Zimbabwe turns 38 years old in terms of independence on the 18th of April this year. For 38 years, Zimbabwean citizens have not had the chance to speak out, to voice their concerns, and to build their nation the way that they think that it must be built. And it was all because of one man, Robert Mugabe, who felt that he had the privilege and the right to decide what kind of health we should all have, what kind of achievement or what kind of dreams that we should live for our lives. In 2008, our nation began to experience one of the worst economic meltdowns that is recorded, rising up to well over 12,000%. We lost everything that we had and ended up with a $1 trillion note. And still, when citizens spoke out in Zimbabwe, nobody listened to them because the culture of listening to people and respecting the rights of people was non-existent and still is non-existent in the nation of Zimbabwe. As we have progressed over the years, many people like myself who grew up in Zimbabwe and did not have the chance to live out our dreams became frustrated. I have children of my own, and I was not prepared to allow a man that had taken the dreams of my grandfather, my father, and my own to also take my children's dreams. And I think that this is the rising voice in Africa, where we as a generation of people are desiring a better future for our own children than the one that our forefathers gave us. It is a shame that the men and women that had become our liberators in 1980 suddenly became our oppressors since then. In 2016, I stood up and began to speak, not because I was elected or because I had a position of some sort, but because I felt that if I did not say anything as a citizen, then I did not deserve to be called a Zimbabwean. As embarrassing as it had become to come from a nation like Zimbabwe because of what it had been through, it still remains my country. I, as a citizen of that country, remain the legitimate voice that can speak up about the struggles, the injustice that we face in that country. Many people have asked us, why do you still do it? It's because we have hope. And hope is the only thing that you have left when you have lost everything. On November 18, almost 1 million citizens in our nation came out to ask Robert Mugabe to resign. The military had stood up first, but we had begun the journey long before they ever did. They did it for their own reasons, but we saw an opportunity to reset our nation and put Zimbabwe towards a better path. I spent much of 2017 in and out of prison. I was arrested at the airport on the 1st of February 2017. After coming back when I had gone to leave my family in safety, I was put in a maximum security prison, and even though I got out on bail, my passport was taken away from me, and I haven't seen my family in well over a year now. I'm thankful that my cases have been dropped, but the fight for a Zimbabwe, better Zimbabwe, continues. This is what drives us. If we cannot cause the politician to change, then we must inspire the citizen to be bold. The message that our new president has come out with is that Zimbabwe is open for business. But the question that every Zimbabwean is asking for is Zimbabwe open for freedom? More than anything else, what we need in Zimbabwe is not just an economic breakthrough, but a breakthrough on democracy and the rule of law. Because it is my personal belief as an ordinary citizen that if I do not have the gift of freedom, if I do not have the opportunity to be who I want to be, to express myself, the rights that are enshrined in my constitution, then economic freedom is just but a fallacy. And so today, as I am here with you, I bring to you the hope of a nation, Zimbabwe, that is now trying to blossom and become the jewel that she actually is. Many are still incarcerated, many are still missing. And we're fortunate, in a sense, that the same people that caused people to disappear, the abductions, the murders that took place in the early 1980s, are in government today. And it is our hope that our citizenry will continue to grow, to hold them to account, so that Zimbabwe heals, and that as a nation, she becomes exactly who she's supposed to become. I close by paying tribute today to the late Morgan Tsvangirai. Morgan Tsvangirai is a man who passed away a few days ago, but he led one of the most powerful democratic movements in Zimbabwe. And his legacy was that Zimbabwe could be a prosperous nation. I believe I'm part of the fruition of that dream that Morgan Tsvangirai had. May his soul rest in peace. And thank you once again for having Zimbabwe here today. God bless you. Thank you very much. Today in Zimbabwe, an amazing man who began a journey for democracy and the rights of Zimbabweans that many of us in Zimbabwe never thought possible. That man is being laid to rest today. Morgan Tsvangirai is a hero for all Zimbabweans. And as a young man, I watched him from afar and only put into practice in the last 2 years that it is possible to stand up to brutality and injustice as an ordinary person and see a change in our nation. I would like to ask you today, Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy, to allow me a moment's silence as they lay him to rest in a little village in Buhera in rural Zimbabwe, to honor this man's life and his contribution for the many Zimbabweans that seek freedom today. Thank you. On the 19th of April 2016, a day after Independence Day in Zimbabwe, I sat in my small church office, disappointed and upset at what Zimbabwe had done to me as a person. Our government had stripped me of any sense of chance of living safely and prosperously in the place that I have the right to call home. As an ordinary citizen and pastor of a small church, I had no options to remedy the sorry state that Zimbabwe had become. What remained that millions had done was to leave the country. So I sat up and used two simple things that I had in that very moment: my phone and my voice. It was my last-ditch effort and a call to my countrymen to save our country. I posted that first video entitled #ThisFlag on Facebook, talking about how our government had taken us for granted, broken our constitution, and robbed our future. I spoke about how it was now our job as ordinary citizens to reclaim the pride of our nation as reflected in the emblems of our national flag. That video and many others after that cracked open a journey in the rise of citizen power that no one expected to see under the brutal dictatorship of Robert Mugabe. A movement of citizens standing up against corruption, injustice, and poverty was born. This flag citizens movement was and still is about holding government to account through the citizens' voice. This voice had been silenced for over 37 years through intimidation, abductions, murders, political violence, economic exclusion, and state capture. Our mantra was, if we cannot cause the politician to change, then we must inspire the citizen to be bold. I was first arrested on the 12th of July 2016 after helping to organize a national shutdown. We refused to go to work, to school, or open our businesses as a way of sending a message to the regime that we were no longer afraid of them and that we no longer tolerated their misrule. I was charged with subversion and accused of attempting to overthrow the government. I faced up to 20 years in prison. My pregnant wife and my 2 infant daughters were threatened with rape and death whilst I was in prison. I was interrogated, threatened with torture, and if I did not disclose who was funding me or if I vowed to continue. After a lengthy and dramatic court hearing, the courts had to let me go because the arrest had violated my constitutional rights. But the greatest victory that day was not the court's decision. It was the thousands of citizens who gathered at the courts from morning until night, demanding my release. We had not seen this kind of mass boldness in a long time. Upon my release, I immediately fled the country under the cover of darkness through a small border. There was a plan to abduct, torture, or rearrest me. My family too was in grave danger, so I had them taken out of Zimbabwe to a safer place. President Robert Mugabe was in the habit of threatening people personally, and he did that to me as well. He promised that there was no place in Zimbabwe for people like me except specially prepared jails, which I would later experience in my journey. He threatened pastors, he threatened ordinary citizens who had rallied with me in the protest. For close to 6 months, I lived in exile, unsure whether going back would be strengthening of the citizen power or it would be the demise of the little hope that we had garnered. You see, hope is the only thing that has kept Zimbabweans going. When we have lost every opportunity, when we have lost sometimes even the willpower to carry on, we have always maintained that we have hope that our nation will somehow change. We had hoped that one day we would find it within ourselves to respect our children's future enough by standing up today. On the 1st of February 2017, I returned to Zimbabwe and I was immediately arrested at the airport. I was charged with subversion for the events that I had escaped from in the previous year. And additionally, I was also charged with attempting to throw the government for a protest which I had led with fellow Zimbabweans at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. I was thrown into the notorious Chikurubi maximum security prison along with convicts of crimes ranging from rape, armed robbery, and murder. The harassment was unbearable, but I had no choice but to face it and survive it. Out on bail, I began yet another journey of more arrests, intimidations, torture, and harassment that lasted 11 months. My passport was taken away from me, and I had to report to the police twice a week for a whole year. I was arrested and imprisoned again for praying with university medical students who were protesting poor learning conditions. I was arrested yet again whilst in the middle of a sermon on Sunday at church for posting a video on Facebook in which I spoke about the shortage of fuel and the increase of basic food prices. Why did I start this? Why did I come back? Why did I continue, you may ask? You see, I found out something after that first video and after that subsequent arrest. I found out that there is no one who brings a fight for Zimbabwe that is sustainable and passionate than a Zimbabwean. There are no heroes coming to save us except ourselves. What we needed was to find that courage to stand for ourselves. I came back to Zimbabwe because it was time to model a Zimbabwean who refuses to run, who rejects intimidation and demands that their voice be heard. And it was worth it. It was worth it because you cannot put a price tag on restored dignity and true freedom. We had longed for Mugabe to just die away, but that would have robbed us of something even better. You see, our expectation of a better Zimbabwe and a better nation was not in the hope that our oppressor would die, but that whilst he lived, we stood up to him. On November 18, 2017, Zimbabweans took an opportunity to confront Robert Mugabe's rule. We stood together in a powerful act of unity and demanded a new start. It was unthinkable that we did what we never thought we would see in our lifetime. We had to play our part and send a message to both Mugabe and future leaders that we had found our voice. On 29 November 2017, after 17 months of arrests, jail time, court appearances, and intimidations, the High Court of Zimbabwe ruled that due to a lack of evidence, I was not guilty of the charges of subversion and the many charges of inciting public violence and the attempt to overthrow our government. It has been said by our new president, who was also part of Mugabe's regime, that Zimbabwe is open for business. However, the question that must be asked is Zimbabwe open for freedom? What we have discovered is that the citizens must never accept a government that muzzles their voice, brutalizes us, and subverts our will. It is not enough to promise free and fair elections. There must be the corresponding enactment and observance of the laws that guarantee freedom and diversity. We ask you to take note of the culture of violence, oppression, and denial of fundamental constitutional rights that has been the culture of the past. It must not continue to happen in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe cannot go into the future with money for business only. She must walk confidently into tomorrow with real freedom for her people too. That is why I choose to continue till today to speak truth to power and never, ever be cowed into silence again. Long live the freedom of the voice of the Zimbabwean citizen. May God bless you. Thank you. You want me to raise that? Oops, upside down. You want me to hold it up? Yeah? That way. Thank you. This way? Yeah? There we go. Thank you.